So we are going through this series called Joyfully Devoted. Devotion is the theme for our year. We are talking a lot about devotion. And now specifically in this series, we are talking about joy. Because where is true devotion, joy will follow. Joy and devotion walk together. And we are talking here and discussing and reading together the letter of joy, Philippians, the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to those Christians in the city of Philippi. And today we are coming to the fourth message, I believe, or fifth. And this is chapter 2, verses 12 to 18. So let me read the text, and then we can have our discussion here. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. So, the great imperative, the great call in this passage is work out your own salvation. This is the call. This is the main thing in here that the Apostle Paul is bringing to this church. He's appealing, he's calling them to work out your own salvation. Work out means practice, exercise, develop, put into action. So Paul is calling them to act, to practice, to exercise. And this is very interesting here because, I have a confession to make. I hate gym. I hate working out. You see by my shape that this is a very true thing. I prefer books. I prefer TV shows. I prefer my couch, right? It's way more interesting for me. Scrolling on my smartphone is way more attractive to me. So this is a challenge for us, especially today in this scrolling generation, to think about what the Apostle Paul is talking here. Work out your own salvation. He's saying that discipleship demands practice. What is learned must be put in practice. There is a great danger, there is a great challenge in our days, which I call nominal Christianity, where you have just a tag in your here, right, in your chest, Christian. and then you identify yourself as a Christian, but there is no visible evidence of this in your life. This is nominal Christianity. But let me say something. Let me give you an example. You are not a musician because you understand music theory. You are not a musician because you know the history of music, or because you have a good taste for music, or because you listen to music all day. You are a musician because you know you have the ability to play an instrument. So practice is essential. You are not a Christian because you have a name tag. You have a name tag because you are a Christian. So we are talking here about this practice. And this is not the only passage in the Bible that we are called to put into practice what we believe. You remember the famous verse in James 1:22, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. So we want to be doers. There is this beautiful quote from William Barclay, one scholar of the New Testament, and he says, knowledge only becomes relevant when it is translated into action. It would be perfectly possible to pass an examination in Christian ethics with the highest distinction and yet not to be a Christian. Knowledge must become action. Theory must become practice. Theology must become life. So this is the spirit of this passage. The Apostle Paul is calling them to practice their faith, their salvation. But notice, before we go ahead, we need to say something. This working out of our salvation must be defined. The call to action must be qualified, because obedience is not everything. Soldiers obey their superiors. You obey your boss. I hope so when you are working. Thank you, Samuel, our great deacon. Thank you so much. So obedience is not everything. Being a Christian is way more than having certain beliefs or behaving in a certain way or practicing certain religious rituals. So when we talk that we need to obey, that we need to practice, work out our own salvation, it's important to qualify that salvation. Because, for example, you remember the Pharisees? They practiced their faith. They were zealous for God. But see this quote from Michael Reeves, this interesting book called Evangelical, Pharisees. He says, the Pharisees kept the most careful eye on their behavior and on themselves, but they failed to keep an eye on the glory of God. So obedience is not everything. They claimed that they were obedient. They loved the scripture, their religious rituals and services, but they were wrong. There is the risk of nominal Christianity, but there is also another risk of religiosity. So we need to qualify, we need to define the Christian obedience. We are not talking here just about having good behavior. It's way more than that. So the question for us here is, what kind of obedience, what kind of working out is Paul talking about? Paul is qualifying, defining a particular kind of obedience, the Christian obedience. Because if you obey to earn your salvation, if you obey because you need to check the religious checklist in your life, this is not the obedience that the Apostle Paul is talking here. So we can deny God by trying to obey God. So obedience is not everything. What are the characteristics of this Christian obedience? I can identify in here, in this passage, at least 7 characteristics. Usually I give you 3 points. Today I have 7. It's a bonus. You don't pay anything for that. Okay? I'll give you more. So 7 characteristics of Christian obedience that we find in this calling from the Apostle Paul. Number 1, and maybe the most important thing, the basis of everything, is that this is a responsive obedience. Notice that the text starts, verse 12, with one very important and crucial word, therefore. So, using that word here has a purpose. The Apostle Paul is connecting what he is about to say with he had just said before. So, this is a responsive obedience. When you read the previous session, Pastor Mauricio preached about that last week, the Apostle Paul is talking about Jesus' obedience. He says that he was being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So the Apostle Paul is talking about Jesus' obedience. And it's important to understand that Christ's obedience is the source, the model, the inspiration, and the power for our obedience. You cannot obey God without Christ. You cannot ignore Christ and try to do it by yourself. Notice that we have a great theological statement. And then he used the word therefore to explain the implications. And he says, work out your own salvation, for it is God who works in you. We can only work out because first he works in. So we work out because God, works in us. In chapter 1, the Apostle Paul had said, he who began the good work in you will bring it to completion. So God is working. At the heart of Paul's argument in here is the fact that when it comes to Christian life, God is always antecedent. He comes first. He acts before we act. We only act because He has already acted. God works in us in advance of our working for Him. God is always prior. He is earlier in time and order. When we come to the church, we don't need to ask God, come and be with us. God, come. No. He was already here, waiting for you. He is first. His working is the cause of which our willing is the effect. God's work in you doesn't make your effort unnecessary. It makes it possible. Notice one important thing. Paul isn't saying here or bringing here a 50-50 relationship where you act 50% and God act 50%. So God does his part and you do your part. No, it's not what the Apostle Paul is saying here. What he's saying here is that God does 100% of the work in providing power and incentive, and we do 100% of the acting, responsive acting, through the power he has supplied to us. So it's both 100%. It's not 50-50. This is his enabling grace in us. Notice that the word says, work out your own salvation. The word is not work out for your salvation. It would be very different if the word was work out for your salvation. No, he's talking here about something that already exists. You are already saved, but you need to work out in response. When I say work out your marriage, I'm not telling you guys to go to a pastor and repeat their vows and sign a certificate and pay maybe some thousands of dollars to have a celebration, a new celebration, and have a new wedding. No. You are already married. I'm telling you to live in accordance with what is already true. You don't need a new wedding. You need a new attitude towards your spouse. This is what I mean when I say work out your marriage. So this is what the Apostle Paul is saying here. There is a huge difference between work for and work out. Work for assumes that salvation is a goal or reward for which you are laboring or striving. Work out assumes that salvation is already in place, has been accomplished by Jesus. And this is why he starts the session with this word, therefore. Once Christ worked there, now we can work here. He made it possible for us to work out your salvation. So, Christian obedience is a responsive obedience. It's not the first obedience. It's not the cause. It's always the second. It's always the response in faith. So, first of all, the first characteristic of obedience, Christian obedience, is that this is a responsive obedience. But there is a second characteristic when and here we can say that this is a loving obedience. Not only a responsive, but also a loving obedience. Notice that he says, therefore, my beloved. So he's not talking to strangers. He's talking as a father talks to his kids. He has a deep affection for them. They are part of the same family. And Jesus, you remember what Jesus said in John 14, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And whoever does not love me does not keep my words. So, any obedience that doesn't flow from our love for God and His love for us is not Christian obedience. If you obey just because you fear, if you obey just because you are obligated, because this is a kind of culture, this is not the real obedience. The real Christian obedience is loving obedience. I remember a friend of mine in Brazil, and he wrote a beautiful book about Christian life, and he shares a personal experience he had with his son. His 8-year-old son. And he says here, one time, my son climbed onto a couch, put his hand on his hip, and asked, "Dad, when I get to be this tall, how you make me obey you?" How would you answer that question? We have lots of parents in here. How would you answer that? And he said, I thought about responding with something tough and forceful, like, "I am the one who puts food on the table. While you are here, you need to obey me." But he said, after a period of reflection, "My son, as long as our relationship is as vital to you as it is to me, as long as you need me as much as I need you, as long as we suffer when we are apart, as long as we miss each other, as long as we love each other the way we do today, I will say go and you go. I'll say stay and you will stay, because you love me. But if one day a wall of separation rises between us, whether from indifference, misunderstanding, or even hatred, then I will no longer say anything to you. And you will no longer need to obey, because it will no longer make any difference. So this is loving obedience. You obey because you love. When you go to Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments, it's very interesting that the 10 Commandments start with a sentence, "I am your God that delivered you from Egypt." The Bible doesn't bring a situation where God said to Moses, "Moses, tell my people in Egypt, obey my 10 commandments. If you obey for 50 years, then I'll come and I'll deliver you." No. First of all, God, in His sovereignty, He comes and He delivers. He saves. And then after that, He says, "Obey me." So it's important for us to understand the basis of Christian obedience. Not out of obligation, not out of the desire for rewarding, but for loving, a loving response. So first characteristic, you remember? A responsive obedience. The second, loving obedience. And now the third is a continuing obedience. Notice that he says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now continue obeying." Christian life is a long obedience in the same direction. This is a title from one of Eugene Peterson's book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. Christian obedience is not casual or circumstantial, it's a continuing thing. It demands perseverance. In this book, Eugene Peterson says, there is a great market for religious experience in our world. There is little enthusiasm for the patient acquisition of virtue, little inclination to sign up for a long apprenticeship, in what earlier generations of Christians called holiness. Religion in our time has been captured by the tourist mindset. Religion is understood as a visit to an attractive site to be made when we have adequate leisure. It's important to understand that obedience, Christian obedience, is not only for Sunday morning. We obey God every time. And He's saying, hey, you started there. I remember how you obeyed. And now you need to continue obeying. So Paul is calling them for a continuing obedience. This is the third characteristic. There are many texts in the Bible calling for perseverance, continuing obedience. The fourth, it's a sincere obedience. Because he says, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence. Notice, he was there, taking care, pastoring them, but now the Apostle Paul is in jail, and he's writing a letter saying, hey, I am not there to see you, to pastor you here, but my calling for you is, in the same way that you obeyed when I was with you, you need to obey now. This is sincere obedience. Let me ask something. Do you work from home? Kind of home office? How many of you work from home? We have lots here that work from home. The great temptation when you work from home is that nobody is seeing you, right? Then you can spend your time playing cards or, watching the series, and then, okay, I need to work a little bit. Your boss thinks that you are working, but you are not. This is not sincerity. So the Apostle Paul is talking, hey, I'm not here to see you. I am not the police hidden to give you a ticket. You need to obey out of your own sincerity and love and response. There is a difference between reputation and character. Reputation is what others think of you. But character is what you are when no one is looking. And the great problem we have today is that many times we are more concerned about having a great reputation than having a great character. You are more concerned with your LinkedIn, your titles, or your Instagram, or whatever you put there for people to see you and think that you are this guy. But only you knows who you are. And the Apostle Paul is talking here about this kind of obedience. When we have kids, we have this experience. We leave and we say, hey, please, organize your room. But imagine that the kid will, when you leave, they will just do another thing. Or then you leave for a week vacation with your wife, and you say, hey, take care of the house. And we see this in movies. Imagine that your son will invite 100 guys to come just for drinking and drugs and other stuff and destroy your house. While you are there, they obey. But what about when they are alone? Every parent should pray that the kids would be able to grow to the point where they obey even when you are not with them. So every parent should work not only for a great reputation, but for a great character for their kids. So the Apostle Paul is talking here about sincere obedience, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence. Number 4, do you remember? I will repeat a lot because this is the only way you can remember. Even me, sometimes I forget. So, number 1, responsive obedience. Number 2, loving obedience. Number 3, continuing obedience. Number 4, sincere obedience. Number 5, we are talking here about reverent obedience. Because he says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Notice that. With fear and trembling. And it's important to understand that in here, when the Apostle Paul, and this is not the only place where he uses that expression, these two words together, fear and trembling. There are other passages in the New Testament. And the meaning here is not of terror, but it is the meaning of awe. Are you able to see the difference? He's not talking about obeying out of terror or fear that paralyzes you. I was making some research and I discovered this kind of psychological condition called fear paralysis reflex, FPR. This is a psychological condition, a protective response that causes a person to feel unable to move or act. When you are afraid, you paralyze, you stop, you are unable to work. So, if the Apostle Paul is talking about acting, he cannot be talking about this terror. He's talking about awe. Fear and trembling is not the response of someone taken aback by great horror, but also of someone struck with great joy. It's the response of a believing heart in the presence of God Himself. Imagine that something extremely good and amazing happens to you. How would you respond? We obey God because looking at chapter 2, verses 5 to 11, and we see Christ's example, we say, wow, how can I not obey this God that made Himself a man, came to my world, and became humble and servant and obeyed to the death? How can I not obey? There is awe, there is this amazement. This is what the Apostle Paul is talking here about. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. He's talking about amazement. So, this is a reverent obedience. Number 6, it is a sacrificial obedience. The text goes on, and I'll be back in a moment for the next verses here, but let me jump to the end. Because the Apostle Paul says here something very interesting. He says, even, verse 17, even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith. He's talking about sacrifice. This kind of obedience, he says, hey, work out. I know this is a sacrifice. And he talks about this drink offering. In the Old Testament, not only in the Old Testament, but even in the Greek and Roman culture, drink offerings, this was a very common thing. It's interesting to notice that the drink offering is not the main offering. It is an addition. When you have the sacrifice, the animal there, and then you pour out a portion of wine and the other very good things to smell. And many times in the Bible, this is a good aroma. It's a good smell to God. And the Apostle Paul is talking here about the imagery of sacrifice. It's not the first time that he uses that image. In Romans chapter 12, the text that Pastor Mauricio read in the beginning of the service, he says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. But let me say something. Sometimes we think, no, there is no sacrifice in Christian life. Jesus paid it all. If you think about there is no sacrifice in terms of there is nothing that we can do or sacrifice in order to get salvation, you are right. But if you are talking about there is no sacrifice and you are meaning, oh, I don't need to pay the high price because Jesus paid it all, you are wrong. Because Christian life involves sacrifice. Jesus doesn't ask you, okay, give me 10% of your time. Give me 10% of your money. Give me 10% of your energy. Give me the leftovers. No, Jesus wants you, 100% of you. And this means sacrifice. And let me say something. The question is not if you will sacrifice. The question is, what are you sacrificing for? Because every one of us sacrifice. If you are a parent, let me ask you something. Do you need to sacrifice for your kids? Do you need to make sacrifices in terms of time? I remember when I got married, the 3 first years, it was amazing. I could go wherever I wanted. Theater, traveling, no restrictions. Total freedom with my wife. But once we got kids, we need to sacrifice. So, when you go to the college or to university, you need to sacrifice because you have a goal. The Apostle Paul is talking here about sacrifice because he knows that Christian life will demand everything. You know, I had some days, vacation days, with Juliana in Italy, the last 10 days. And one of the places we visited was the catacombs in Rome. And this was a really, really eye-opening experience for me. Going down, 1 level, 2 levels, 3 levels, 500,000 of people buried there. Hundreds of kilometers of catacombs, most of them Christian people. And the stories reveal the shocking thing. How they needed to sacrifice for Jesus, their Lord. It's interesting that we need to understand that sacrifice is part of life. There is one thing that I always taught my 3 daughters, and they are able, if you ask them, they are able to tell you this principle of life that we got for a friend. He was a Marine in Brazil, and he told me that there is 10 laws of jungle warfare in Brazil. The war in jungle. And the guys, the soldiers, they have 10 laws, and he shared with me the 4th law. And since the kids were very small, I taught them that law. I encourage you to teach to your kids. You avoid many problems with that law. And it says, learn to endure the discomfort and fatigue without complaint and be moderate in your needs. This is the fourth law of these soldiers in the jungle. And it's Christian, right? The Apostle Paul is saying here, hey, I know your obedience will be a sacrifice. Sometimes, in order to be faithful to God, you need to sacrifice other things. You need to reframe your agenda, your priorities, your relationships. So this is a sacrificial obedience. And last of this message, we have this joyful obedience. This is the last characteristic, because he says, even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Notice what he's saying. If I am here in this prison, and even if you sacrifice, you obey, you need to face persecution, you should, he says, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. Christian obedience is always joyful. There is no space for complaint. You obey, you sacrifice, but you are smiling. Let me ask you something. Imagine that your dream is to have a trailer, an RV. Your dream is to have a big one, very comfortable, right? But it costs a little bit. And you don't have much money. And then you need to, work and work and work. And you make some sacrifices in order to get money, to save money. And after years of working hard, you come to the point where you have the money to go there. And you go there and you buy this beautiful, powerful RV. Thousands of dollars. Let me say, you gave thousands of dollars, work, sacrifice. But do you think that this guy will come there and he will leave the dealership crying? Oh, I lost my money, years of savings. I had to buy these. Do you think the attitude will be a suffering one? Of course not. The guy will come and he will be back, feeling that he is the king, right? Driving this RV after many years, he got. There is joy, although there was sacrifice. And if we have joy for these minor things, the question is, are we having joy in our Christian life? Are we having this excitement that when comes Saturday night, we say to our spouse, hey, tomorrow is the day. Tomorrow is the day that I'll be with my church, my brothers, my sisters. This causes me great joy to be there. This is what we are talking here. Doesn't matter the sacrifice. You make your arrangements because you are joyful. This is truly true devotion. This is what the kind of obedience. God doesn't want any obedience that you show out of, oh God, I need to obey, really. 7 characteristics of Christian obedience. You can repeat with me. Number 1, it is a responsive obedience. Number 2, it is a loving obedience. Number 3, it is a continuing obedience. Number 4, it is a sincere obedience. Number 5, reverent obedience. Number 6, sacrificial obedience. Number 7, a joyful obedience. This is not religiosity. This is life, the Christian life. This is Jesus living within you. And you obey out of these things. And you ask me, what are the implications? The text has other things. I will just highlight 2 very quick things here and we finish. We have 6 minutes. Notice that verse 14 says, do all things without grumbling and disputing. It's important to understand that this is the specific implication for the Philippians context. You know, Pastor Maurice already said that there was a real and serious problem in the church in Philippi, which was the lack of unity. They were disputing, they were grumbling, they were fighting each other. There was some kind of complaining there. And the Apostle Paul is saying, hey, working out your own salvation in your context means do all things without grumbling and disputing. This is a valid principle for us today, but it's important to understand that this was the practical and specific implication for them. And my question reading that is, in what specific areas do you need to work out your own salvation today, exercising practical obedience in your life today? Because in their context, the problem was that. But in your context, what does it mean to work out your own salvation? Maybe you'll find that you need to work out your relationship with your wife. You need to put this in practice. You are not practicing obedience. Or with your work or relationships or forgiveness. The word says, hey, forgive. And maybe the challenge you face today is about forgiveness. You know everything about the theory about forgiveness. But you need to work out forgiveness or devotion or your testimony. There are many. I don't know your challenge. All of us, we need to make this assessment and to think about our particular challenges, the areas in our lives that we need to work out. And the result of this. What's the result? What's the purpose? The final thing here. Paul says that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life. He says the result is that the world will see a different people. You shine as lights in the world. Jesus said, you are the light of the world. And the world will see this light when they identify that what you believe is the same thing that you live. If you don't practice, they will hear beautiful words. They can hear the gospel, but they won't see the gospel. We don't hear the light, but we see what the light shines. T.S. Eliot said the greatest proof of Christianity for others is not how far a man can logically analyze his reasons for believing, but how far in practice he will stake his life on his belief. Practice. Work out your own salvation, because what the world will see is your life. if you say something, if you believe something, if you say, oh, I have these opinions, I believe that, this is good, but this is not enough to the world, because they need to see the difference that Jesus makes in your life. Let me finish here praying, but before that, let me share this one experience. As I told you, I was there in Italy, and I had this privilege of seeing some of the greatest art pieces in the history. I was really, really impressed with Michelangelo. When you go and you see the ceiling of Sistine Chapel, or when you see this 4-5 meters statue called David, out of just a block of marble, or when you see the Pietà, when you see the St. Peter's Basilica, and Michelangelo was the architect for that, you imagine, how is that possible? The level of perfection, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And I was thinking about that today, the world doesn't see Michelangelo anymore. It was 500 years ago that he did all these things. But even today, 500 years later, we see his work. We see what he did and we praise him. We see the statue, the ceiling, and we imagine, wow. And I'm thinking about the context of what I'm saying here. The Bible said it is God that works in you. He began the good work. Imagine that God is this Michelangelo working in you. You are just a marble block of stone, and God is there working, hitting you. You suffer. He is working, working, working. To the point. And this is what he wants. That the world, the whole world, will see you and say, wow, what a masterpiece of the Creator. Look at that people. Look at that church. Every time when we wake up and we look at the mirror, the question is, what are we seeing? If your answer is, okay, I'm seeing myself, wrong answer. God is working in your life to the point that when you wake up and look at the mirror, you see Jesus. Jesus is the model. Many of those statues, I think, for example, for David, we know that it took 4 or 5 years for Michelangelo to sculpt this image. And of course, there was a model. And I think, wow, this guy had to stay there 4 years. You know, the real thing is Jesus. And God is looking Jesus, and He's looking the marble, which is you, and He is working. Let's see it. And He wants you to be perfect like Jesus. So when God works in your life, let's be humble. And let's hear what He's saying here. Work out your own salvation. Because it is God that is working in you every day. So you can shine as lights in the world. And the world will see you, and instead of glorifying you, the world will glorify God who made you.